My path to pursuing a career in the arts is actually very much connected to why I started an arts organization. I actually had started a career in sales, and not because it was something that I wanted to do, but because I'm a post-civil rights baby. What we were taught was part of service to the community was going to get a good job, whatever that means. And so I took a job with a Fortune 500 company, and was doing very much the thing that I was taught to do, and very quickly knew it wasn't what was in my belly, it wasn't my purpose or my passion, but it bought me time to figure out what that was. And when I actually challenged myself to think about what I would do for free, I realized that it was both something that had to do with the arts and something that had to do with serving my community. My own academic background is in African American studies, both undergrad and grad, and I wanted to find a way to marry the two. So my career in the arts has very much been about not only the power of art, but the power of art to be a force of change for a particular community, specifically communities of color. So my path really began with starting all over again. So I literally kind of had already charted a career in the corporate sector, and so when I decided to transition to the arts, really wanted to get a practical education. And I needed to figure out whether I wanted to teach art, whether it was a particular genre, whether it was arts administration or art education. I really had to figure it out. And so I ended up quitting my job, saving up money, quitting my job, selling all my furniture, moving back in with my mother, just really on the humbug, starting all over again, and went to work for an organization called Painted Bride Art Center in Philadelphia. And I'm from Philadelphia, so my chops were really from hustling in Philadelphia's nonprofit arts community and just trying to understand the different structures of organizations. So I interned with Painted Bride for about 4 months, 6 months, something like that. And my internship was full-time, so I really behaved as if I had a salary, and I was there. If they were there for 12 hours, I was there for 12 hours. If they were there for 5 days, I was there for 5 days. If they were there for 7 days, I was there for 7 days. So I really got a genuine sense of what it meant to work in the sector, specifically nonprofit arts. And then from Painted Bride, went to work for a small foundation in Philadelphia, and got to see the other side of it, and working for a philanthropy that was specifically focused on small arts institutions in Philadelphia gave me a landscape, like a bird's eye view to the cultural landscape of a particular city, and also helped me see the sort of multiple strategies that people were taking in this work, whether it was visual art, performing arts, writing. When I decided that I was going to quit my job and start all over again, as I said, I started to kind of hustle in Philadelphia's art community, and I really treated that as my practical education. So I kept journals. I not only interned and worked at places and did consulting gigs, but I would actually keep record of things that I would do differently, things that I observed that I would do differently, or things that I thought were really smart and best practices. I would keep track of conversations. If I went to a panel on a topic, I would, write down the topic and what my thoughts were and what some of the points of debate were. So I really treated it like this was a degree, like I was, going to school for this, but I was just doing it in a kind of practical setting, in a kind of real-world, hands-on way. And so very quickly I knew that I wanted, in that process, very quickly I knew that I wanted to start my own arts organization, but I needed that process to really help me clarify exactly what the mission of that organization would be and how it would be different, how I would actually be contributing something different than what already existed. I knew I wanted to bring art to where people already were, and originally I had the thought that many folks have had: let's do public art, let's do murals, let's do things outdoors, and I remember having a conversation, I've talked about this before, I remember having a conversation, because I also beat everyone's ear, that's the other thing I should say. I would talk to everyone and anyone about what I wanted to do, and that helped, it helped me to kind of express my passion and help fuel my passion, but it also helped me get a lot of great advice and counsel and feedback about what seemed strong and what I still need to work on. And I remember having this one conversation, and the person was very patient with me, and they listened, and great, yay, good for you. And then they were like, okay, and how will you pay for that? And I hadn't really thought about that. And even though I had had this kind of business background from working in the corporate sector, I really had not sat down and thought about what is the revenue model for this vision that I have. And so as I answered both those questions, where do I bring, how do I bring art to where people are, and how do I pay for it? I landed on the laundromat as a place where people already are and they have downtime, and also as a way to generate revenue. So the Laundromat Project, as it stands, is an arts organization that works with existing laundries and does programs, whether we're commissioning artists to do that or have a kind of faculty of teaching artists to do that. But the vision for the organization is to actually have our own building, our own laundry business, and an art center above. And so the revenue from the laundry business supporting the nonprofit art center activities. Basically, as I said, I landed on the Laundromat Project maybe, a year into my journey. I quit my job in 98, and by mid-99, I would say, had really, realized that the laundromat was a space and was trying to tease out what that might look like. And when I got to the ceiling of what I could accomplish in the practical realm without having a formal training in arts and culture, because again, my background is in humanities, I went back to grad school and used my vision for the Laundromat Project as my grad school application, quite frankly. I started NYU's Gallatin School, which is a school of individualized study, and it's basically an interdisciplinary approach to humanities. So you can marry, they actually encourage a kind of like cross-disciplinary approach to solving a problem. So there were folks that married art and biology and, all kinds of approaches. And basically what I wanted to do was marry art with African American culture and really not just focus on the classroom, but also on a studio practice and also working in New York's art sector. So again, in my journey, I applied, got in, crafted this program, and part of my program was actually working for MoMA for a year. So I got a full-time internship there, so I was going to grad school full-time and working at MoMA full-time, and still keeping my journal, and still, telling everybody that I could tell I want to do this project. And that proved to be fruitful because I had there was some kind of event that they had organized for the interns at MoMA, and one of their patrons is the Louis Auchincloss Foundation, and the executive director at the time was present for that event, and so I was talking to her about what I wanted to do, and she took interest, and it was not an extensive conversation that we had, but what it did mean is that when I graduated and had my degree and was applying for my first wave of support, I applied to the Louis Auchincloss Foundation, and though they do not give out seed money, they gave us our first programming money. So it really, it was about being focused. It was about having a very clear vision and plan that I had done my homework. I wasn't just talking to people about what I wanted to do in a very abstract way, but had really rooted it in what I had observed to date as best practice, what I was learning in the classroom, what my own experience had been in the field, and having actually done some preliminary numbers of what I thought it would take to make this happen. The other thing that I did was apply for seed money from the Echoing Green Foundation, which is seed capital for social entrepreneurs, and their application process in and of itself is an incredibly useful I'm going to say exercise. Even if you don't get the money, it is forcing you to get so crystal clear about the vision that you have and its impact in the world and how you're going to go about it. That I did end up getting that seed money, but it also meant that the project went from a great idea to something that had real legs, really had a plan behind it. And so I was writing the Echoing Green proposal as I was writing my thesis, and pretty much, graduated in, the spring of 2004, I guess, and we had seed funding by that fall, and so began working on Laundromat Project's infrastructure, putting the board together, figuring out how we wanted to structure the organization because it has this this vision for being a social enterprise. It wasn't just about going out and incorporating as a nonprofit, really thinking about, do we do a nonprofit that has a for-profit subsidiary? Like, what, you know, the real nuts and bolts of what it means to put together a nonprofit or put together an institution, whatever tax structure that's going to be. And so really was very systematic in trying to answer those questions. I think one of the many lessons that I learned from starting this organization, and that I absolutely share as the gospel, is the importance of paced growth, of not feeling a sense of time pressure, that it has to be giant fast, or that even bigger is better, but really wanting to be intentional and strategic about every decision, every important decision. And we took our time to figure out what the right way to describe the mission is. We took our time to think about what the logic model would be for the programs as well as for the organization, what the theory of change is. And you know, you'll notice that I'm using language that is not often the language of the art sector, but is often the language of the change sector, of social justice and social change. And that was really important because our mission, though it is rooted in arts and culture, understands the power of culture in change work. And so yeah, I mean, just again, being incredibly thorough in trying to understand the many landscapes that we were going to touch: social enterprise, social justice, and arts and culture, and figuring out how we would craft the structure of the organization and the programs to execute that vision. Okay, so the Laundromat Project, community-based nonprofit. In a nutshell, we bring art programs to laundromats. So we have a drop-in art making program called Works in Progress, where we actually set up shop in or in front of a laundromat and do art education workshops for all ages, 8 to 80, that folks can do over a wash cycle. So in a 30 to 60 minute time period, you can not only learn how to make a book or learn how to do solar printing or sidewalk drawing, or make your own kaleidoscope, but you're able to do it in a framework where you're learning more about your community. There's always some kind of visioning element, so if you make a book, it's a book about Harlem because that's where you live. If you're doing kaleidoscope, you're trying to think about what are all of the sort of textures that embody your community, and that's what you're using to make your kaleidoscope. If you are making a silk screen, you're using stencils that are iconic images from this neighborhood, so that even the next generation is very much rooted in the current and past history of where you live. So that's Works in Progress. Our longest standing program is Create Change, which is a public artist residency program. So if you think about what a traditional artist residency is, you're going to an institution and you're in residence at that institution. For us, a residency is about, you live in a neighborhood, you're part of a neighborhood, so how can you actually bring your creative practice to your neighbors? So this public artist residency commissions artists to do a site-specific public art project in their local laundromat. So they have to, think about what is possible in that space and really think about their own relationship to their neighborhood. As you can imagine, many people are traveling in order to do their artwork or their sort of to live out their careers, and your neighbor may not know that you are an artist or even what that means. And so this is an opportunity to have a much more visible presence in your neighborhood and to really consider what you might contribute. And that program has grown to not only be a kind of opportunity to be commissioned to do a project, but it has a whole suite of professional development that goes along with that. So we support about 5 artists every year. We bring those artists together twice a month. One session to just workshop each other's projects, and the other session with a guest speaker who can talk about the specific skill sets, knowledge that is entailed in being a publicly engaged artist. So that ranges from community organizing strategies to methods of collecting oral histories to using social media to kind of broaden the audience and impact of the work that you're doing, to the sort of common challenges of making a career in the arts, of, how do you talk about your work to the different audiences that are involved, etc. So we've tried to create a really robust experience and way to build the capacity of artists who are interested in having a socially engaged practice but may not have had that formal training in school. We try to provide an opportunity to kind of develop and deepen that practice. I think the opportunity is actually in the challenges. So one of the challenges from the gate was having this big vision that included a capital project, include a for-profit business, as well as launching a nonprofit. And in retrospect, I understand how it was even more enormous than I understood it to be even then. And so there were a lot of folks who were excited about it. This was innovative. Wow, great idea. Why didn't someone think of this, sooner? But didn't really want to invest the dollars at a sort of a venture philanthropy or venture capital even frame. It was kind of like, great, come back to us 3 years from now after you've done some programming, or great, can you do this in a smaller way? I got tired of trying to sell the concept of the organization. I wanted to actually get on with the mission. And so one of the things I had to think about was, how can we still launch our programs? How can we still do this public artist residency even if we don't have this space? And so it made us think about this model of working with existing laundromats, which meant that we now are in every borough. That wasn't the original vision. We were going to have one location in one neighborhood. So that challenge became an opportunity to think differently about our work, and has paid off, and that we now can have a much greater impact much sooner than if we had just had a single address. That is still true now. So here we've, kind of done a proof of concept and launched our programs, and begun to see that there's a real need. There's a real, or not that there's a real need, we knew that, but that there's a genuine response. The challenge for us right now is, how do we scale up to the next level? And we're not talking about growing gigantically, but going from being a scrappy startup to really having the money to staff the organization at the level that is appropriate to be effective, not just to do what we want to do, but to be effective, to actually offer programs where we're creating genuine relationships with the folks that we are creating these programs for and with, to do this work well. And so that is our challenge, and again, is our opportunity. So it means now taking stock of not just who we thought we wanted to be, but really looking at who we are, how we actually crafted these programs, how they've actually implemented. So what are the new opportunities that those programs present that weren't on the radar at the organization's inception? It means that because we have begun this work, we now have this whole beautiful army of thoughtful, incredible, creative people who can add input to that, who can say, this is what's really working, and this is what I would suggest that you do differently, or hey, do you even know how you might tap into this thing over here that wouldn't have been on the radar of just one person if I had been a one-woman show? And I think that those challenges aren't necessarily unique. I think that that is sort of inherent to the startup process, is that you have a vision, you set out a plan, your plan should be rigorous, but you have to, the plan is a framework. You still have to be nimble, you still have to be responsive, you still have to be willing to be in the moment and responding to the reality of what is actually possible at that moment, and allowing the work to take you in a slightly different direction, which is different from mission drift, but it's just about being a learning institution. I think there are loose definitions that frame it as a kind of entrepreneurial approach to something that has a larger social purpose attached to it, as opposed to just pure profit. And there's other folks that take a more macro view around it being just kind of almost kind of a do-gooder mentality. I mean, I really feel like a social entrepreneur is an entrepreneur of a social enterprise. That there is some organization, some institution, some vehicle attached to it, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, or it's, you know, one of these sort of B corporations and the new kind of flavors and structures that are coming down the pike to support this kind of hybrid work. But I do think that a social entrepreneur is someone who's actually creating or leads already that that kind of entity. I think the ingredient is the enterprise, and so if your enterprise is arts focused and it's a social enterprise, and you're a social entrepreneur and you also are an arts professional. But so I don't think it's about I don't think it's about the what, it's about the how, right? So being a social entrepreneur speaks more to your approach to a particular issue as opposed to what that issue might be. I think the landscape for social entrepreneurship is more vibrant than it's ever been. I think the work has gone on for a long time, but I think there's something that has made social enterprise and social entrepreneurship catch fire. And I think you're seeing more and more of this current generation of 20-somethings, 30-somethings really latch on to the idea that we actually have the power to change things that we've have been struggling to come up with real solutions around. That being said, I would love, and I don't think this has happened yet, I would love to see the day when arts and social enterprise, arts and social entrepreneurship is a much more common and well-resourced thing. And right now I think you see social enterprise applied much more to the realm of health and human services, much more to poverty reduction, and these are all, of course, critical things. There's, you know, this is not, it shouldn't be either or. And for me, that is what I hope to see, is that we live in a world that understands our whole selves, that we obviously need shelter and clothing and food, but that we also need our spirits. As I said, my own background, my own upbringing was post-civil rights. It's you know, during the kind of anti-apartheid movement, but it was sort of in between concrete, defined social movements. And I think there was this hope, this expectation that somehow integration was going to be the antidote to a lot of the struggle, just the fundamental struggle of being a human being, of being a citizen in this country for Black people. And that's not the reality. And the reality is that structural change has to happen to allow people to earn a living. Structural change has to happen to allow people to have an education. Structural change has to happen to allow people to be citizens. But there is still a fundamental human shift that has to occur to be fully free, to actually fully own your person, to fully own your sense of possibility, to feel that it is not only possible but your birthright to be able to do and be whatever it is that you can conceive, to tap into your belly, to know your purpose, and to enact that purpose. And the reality is that the structure of our society does not facilitate that. Not only doesn't facilitate that, it's actually designed to not facilitate that. That's the reality. We can talk about all kinds of abstract ideas like post rates, but the bottom line is that we still structurally, as a country, because we were founded on stolen land and on the idea that human beings could be property, fundamentally we are designed as a nation to oppress. Our economic system is contingent on oppression. It's contingent on there being an underclass. It's contingent on very particular bodies being part of that underclass. And the reality is that's still people of color. That's still poor people that are designed to stay poor, that are designed to fill our prisons. So because that's its own economy and industry. So the reality is, until we actually live in a society where to be human is to be human, period, we aren't free. We aren't, not inherently. And so we are still charged with our own liberation. It is not something that happens just because we come out of the womb. We are still living in a time, ever more in a time, where our daily decisions, our life path, has to be charted in such a way that we go against the grain of what was designed for us to be, that we actually own our lives. And so in saying all that, recognizing that in terms of policy, in terms of the legacy of oppression, the legacy of having the wealth of your family's labor stripped from you, and so not having that to build on now, in that context, there have to be other interventions. There have to be ways that free our thinking, that expand our notion of what's possible for ourselves and the world, where our own capacity to envision change is nurtured, because again, that is not part of our education system. I believe the visual art, I believe that the creative process, all art making, provides a way to practice visioning, practice figuring out some other thing and pulling that some other thing from seemingly out of the ether and making it tangible and real. And my own work, my own choices personally are about how am I enacting my full purpose, not as a Black woman, but as me, specifically, my spirit on this planet and who I came to be. And then my choices as a arts professional, and my choice of being in the arts period, is about how can I help to create opportunities where more Black bodies can do the same. There's so many people that I feel like I have learned from, not just in this field, just period on this planet. Okay, let's start. So I think, I found Zora Neale Hurston when I was 16, and she helped open up my sense of what it meant to be a Black woman, on this planet, and to own my voice. I think about Harriet Tubman a lot. Think about what courage is required in not only taking ownership of your own liberation, but also helping others facilitate their own, and the very difficult choices that are required in that process. I think about my grandmother. I think about my mother. I think about my family's commitment to education and to doing whatever it took to make the best possible education available for their children, because they understood that to be the center of possibility, the way to generate options if money was not the ticket. And I did not grow up with a lot of money. I did not grow up hungry, but I also didn't grow up with an unlimited set of resources to do whatever I wanted to do. And so it meant that I had to learn very quickly how to engender my own vision, and really, really, really appreciate having family members who were examples of that. Robin Kelley is someone who I think has influenced a lot of people as a human being and as a historian, and his work, if you're not familiar with it, is something that you need to read today. And it's a beautiful example of how history does not have to be a set of dates and timelines and abstract thought, but can be told in a kind of first-person voice that is still accurate and objective in collecting different perspectives. His book, Freedom Dreams, is very much the kind of, I won't say conceptual platform for the Laundromat Project, but it helped give me language to talk about what we want to do fundamentally, that I don't think I could have come up with so succinctly. So the idea of all change starting with the vision, that is absolutely what the Freedom Dreams is about. So his work is really, really important to me. Deborah Willis, in the way that she has not only created this incredible career as a historian, as a photographer, as an artist, but that she has understood the power of her position to be a connector, to make sure that there would be generations of artists, photographers, arts administrators, curators, writers, educators behind her, beside her, that she understood that she had to open the door, and that door had to get wider and wider and wider because she was going to bring more and more people in. That is phenomenal. Claudine Brown, who is now at the Smithsonian, but was at Nathan Cummings for a long time, and before that was at the Brooklyn Museum, and is just a veteran in this field. Similar to Deb in understanding that they had the power to be connectors, that they had the power to be mentors, that they had the power to, and that the other piece of that with both of them is that it wasn't about people sharing their philosophies or perspectives, that it wasn't about I like you and so I'm going to create opportunities for you, but bottom line, you are a woman of color, you are an artist of color, you are a young person in this field trying to do this work. I know that I can help to connect the people that will be resources, connect you to people that are going to give you feedback about your work, connect you to people that might give you your first break, that all of us need to be in this room, regardless of whether we're all, and precisely perhaps because we're not all saying the same thing, we all need to be in this room, and how can I use my body and my career to help facilitate that. There's so many people. I mean, I actually don't even know where to start to answer that question. I think that I have been blessed to be, I've worked with a lot of women. I've worked with a lot of women, both black and white, black, white, Asian. I mean, I've just worked with a lot of people, but I've worked with a lot of women who took a special interest in what I was interested in and wanting to be resources for me. And sometimes it wasn't always the right fit, but what I appreciated was that I wasn't alone, and that I will say that because when I have had folks who, I don't know, this is such a hard question. I mean, I've had mentors that, there was a woman in college who was like my mother away from home. In the field, Laura Raska, when I went to work at Painted Bride, pretty much let me do whatever I wanted to do, not because, she wasn't interested in my path, but just because she recognized that, yeah, getting coffee is probably not the best use of my talents. And so, gave me the creative space and freedom to actually work on projects that would be meaningful for both me and for Painted Bride. And that's incredibly generous for an institution that has limited resources when they get free labor to not just be thinking about what do they need immediately, but how can they genuinely be a resource for the next generation, as someone who didn't have any prior professional background in the arts. When I got to New York, I went in search of mentorship and was really disappointed. I was really struck by how hard it was to find black women of the generation before me, black women specifically in the kind of museum sector, of the generation before me, who were willing to kind of open doors. Remember going to various events and that being a discussion, how there was this kind of gap between 20 and 30-something art professionals of color who were black women, and the kind of seasoned professionals that went before us. And what I realized, I think over time eventually, was that mentorship is important, but that whole adage of we are the ones that we're waiting for is really important also. That having the sense that someone was somehow going to lay out a carpet for me and didn't really acknowledge how hard it is to craft a career in this sector, and how much of a full-time job it is to manage your own sanity and your own well-being in that journey, as well as bringing folks along, which is why I think that the people that do it are so phenomenal and profound. That being said, in turn, because I have benefited from folks who have taken an interest in me, regardless of whether we share the same background in history, I've tried to do the same. And so I really enjoy going to classes and talking to folks who are studying arts administration or artists who want to work in a kind of community engaged way. I enjoy talking to anyone who's really interested in doing this work and is at the beginning and is looking for some kind of direction for how to get started, because I just think that we all need a little push. We all need a little bit of support in just getting started, just really having somewhere where to begin. Anytime I encounter an organization, particularly an organization of color that's been around for 40 years, 50 years, I have such profound admiration for the staying power, for all the storms I can imagine that they had to weather. And I think my questions are always about strategies for sustainability. And I don't mean sustainability in the how do you keep paying the bills, but how you stay sane, how you don't burn out, how you don't become jaded, how you really stay grounded in the work, and being well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I made a decision very consciously not to be on staff at the organization that I founded. One of the things I observed in the field very early and continue to observe is founders who stay with the organization for 30 years, 40 years, 25 years. And there's great value in that kind of institutional memory, in that kind of consistent leadership. But there's also a great deal to be lost through founder syndrome, where an entity kind of grows, part and parcel in that person. It's hard to separate the two. And I think that challenge of making sure that we are creating institutions that are fundamentally mission-driven, that continue to stay centered on the people that we want to serve, the people that we want to work with, who our partners are, the real stakeholders of the work, and not of our own personal egos, not of our own career paths, but really the work itself, I think requires a refreshment of leadership, of new ways of leadership on a regular basis. And there's something, I think, about the generations that have gone before us where that has been a difficult task. And I look forward to the time in our sector when we really are not just giving lip service to the idea that we want a new wave of leaders to succeed us, but that we really are building systems and building a culture of always bringing up the next generation, not to be our yes men, not to be our assistants, not to be on the side, but really at the center of the work, and to trust our own capacity to do enough of a good job that we've helped support what is already their capacity for leadership, and that we've created stable enough institutions that there is room for leadership to mature and blossom, and that it doesn't crumble just because we're not present. Whoever you are, whatever it is that you want to do, whether you want to work for some giant corporation or you want to, work in the arts or you want to work in the nonprofit sector, whatever it is, you are in charge of your own life. You are in charge of your own path. And I think my advice is to get as clear about what is important to you, what are your values, what is your purpose, what do you feel like is a reason that you were put on this planet. And to then go out and get experiences that support that help you get clearer and clearer, that help you actually enact that purpose. But your path, even if you were on someone else's payroll, still belongs to you. There's a series, I think the series is called something like Choose Your Own Adventure, which is a children's book. And I think that it's actually a very useful primer for being an entrepreneur, for charting your own path, because the way that the book is constructed, or the series of books are constructed, is that, you read a little bit about, the story, and then there's a cliffhanger, and you can go one of two ways. And if you want to go one way, you go to page 26. If you want to go another way, you go to page 102. And I mean, that's the reality, is that all of our choices have specific results, and we have to have the courage to just choose. Okay, one piece of advice: apply to create change. Seriously, that is so big. I think I would say that it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage on a couple of levels. I think if this is work that you don't already do, it takes courage to work in a different way. I think even if it is work that you do, it takes courage to show up in a vulnerable way, to show up as not as an expert, not as a performer even, but just as a fellow neighbor, and to be generous, to be basically sharing your talent and your perspective for no other reason than because you believe that it can actually contribute to where you live. And so I think whatever you need personally to feel comfortable in that kind of courage and that kind of generosity, I think seek out. So if that means it's a formal program like Create Change, if that means that it is getting a group of your neighbors that you already have a relationship with around the dinner table and shopping your idea, do that. If it means talking to other artists who have done this work and getting their perspective, do that. Whatever you need to feel like you can be grounded in this work in a kind of genuine way, think about that honestly and then seek that out. Balance is not a finite space. Inherently it is something that is a dynamic process. And so it's day to day. Some days I feel like, wow, I'm really working this out. And other days I'm like, wow, I have to take better care of myself. I mean, it's a constant practice. But what I would say, some of the elements that help me stay present in the moment is having a sense of humor, breathing. I mean, not to be funny, but really breathing, literally being in my body. And when I feel like I'm in this wave of crazy stress and I'm tight and, then I just have to kind of like take a time out and get reconnected to my breath and just be in that moment. Because even if there weren't 50-11 projects, even if I wasn't holding multiple titles, I mean, the reality is that just as a society, as a globe, I would even say, there's such a hyper pace to the day-to-day lives that we are living. I think it's really easy to become overwhelmed with the volume of what is competing for our attention. And the only way that I can stay sane is if I'm dealing with one thing at a time. And the only way to deal with one thing at a time is to actually be connected to my breath. So that is definitely a strategy for balance. I also try to set some boundaries. So I don't do work on the weekends. That might surprise people. There was a long time when I would do 12-hour days and 18-hour days and literally roll out of bed and start working, and then, roll out of bed at 7, start working at 7:30, and then go to bed at 11, and I'm leaving my desk to go to bed. I mean, that's just not a life. Or I would be available 7 days a week because that's what was required. And I just had to set some boundaries to say, I work from Monday to Friday, and I am present, fully present in that work. But then I check out, and sometimes I might have things that have to get done over the weekends, but chances are it's not going to get done. The other thing is that when I'm with my family, I'm with my family, and that is new. That took some practice in doing. So, holidays are holidays. The other thing I would say around balance is that, again, I don't feel compelled to answer the phone. So my cell phone exists, I carry it with me, but again, it's turned off when I go home. I'm home. I don't check work email over the weekend. There's just boundaries, really, really important. And I think the final thing I will say, there's two things I will say. One is that I have not mastered balance. It is very much a work in progress, and there's still things that I need to get better about, like going to the gym, consistently. But health is definitely at the center of it as well. And so every Sunday I cook my meals for the rest of the week. I don't have to think about what it is I'm going to use as my fuel because it's already there. And so that means I've actually been able to make healthy choices to begin with. Now, I'm human, and sometimes, I want a cookie, and it's very stressful when I want some ice cream, and, I'm human, but it means that the foundation of what is coming into my body and acting as energy to allow me to do all this work is good for me, and is going to actually, support my endurance and not a whole bunch of, climaxes and crashes. Ooh, wow, so many people. I would say Michael Primo. Michael Primo, Housing is a Human Right, and his partner in crime, Rachel Falcone. I think the work that they're doing is really interesting in and of itself, and important in and of itself, and looking at housing as a human right. It's generous in that everyone's voice is welcome, and they're really, really good at creating opportunities for people to tell their stories in a really genuine way, an effective way, and with purpose. I don't know if I can do their work justice, but I think Michael is someone to watch and has his hand in a lot of different projects, a lot of different organizations, not just here in New York, but all over the country and globally. I am most energized by those moments where I've been able to help someone engender their own aha. And so if I can do that for many people, that would be a life well lived.